Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump's COVID-19 task force briefing last evening was really a tribute to American industry in large measure. Honeywell, Jockey, Procter & Gamble, United Tech, as well as our friend Mike Lindell from MyPillow, all present and accounted for to provide to the American people what their companies are providing as they have shifted their focus to help respond with materials to aid in the response to the pandemic. Give you a few examples. Darius Adamczyk, who is the Honeywell CEO, on the production, what Honeywell is doing on the production of masks.
So in total, we've doubled our production of N95 masks already. It's going to double again within the next 60 days. And then within the next 90 days, we're going to have 5x the capacity we do today. Furthermore, we're going to be providing other safety equipment to support all the efforts going on. Lastly, I'll say a big thank you to all the Honeywell employees and also announce a $10 million fund for them, for all the hourly and administrative employees who are having a hard time during this time of crisis.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it is nice. Deborah Waller, she's the CEO of Jockey, which is headquartered just north of us on the other side of the cheese curtain in Kenosha.
We expect to begin delivering 30 to 50,000 gowns per week, helping those that need it the most right now. In addition, this week, we are also donating 10,000 units of scrubs to the frontline doctors and nurses at the Javits Convention Center in New York City.
Procter & Gamble's David Taylor.
They've worked together to transform our plants, to make things we've never made before, like hand sanitizers and facial masks. Some of these are already getting to national, state, and local agencies. Some of them are in the hospitals already.
United Tech CEO Gregory Hayes, also representing Raytheon.
Again, we're working also with logistics, and if you think about a war, strategy is important, but logistics wins war. It's imperative, I think, with FEMA, along with Mr. Navarro's office, that we coordinate all of these activities. Last week, we donated about 90,000 pieces of personal protective equipment to FEMA. Next week, we'll have another almost 1 million, again, working through our supply chain partners around the world. We're also today, this week, beginning the manufacture of face shields using the additive technologies that we have and the machines that we have available within UTC. We'll be able to produce approximately 10,000 shields in the next 4 weeks. Again, all needed equipment.
And our friend Mike Lindell.
MyPillow has designated some of its call center to help U.S. companies navigate the many issues that resulted from this pandemic. We've dedicated 75% of my manufacturing to produce cotton face masks. Up to 10, in 3 days, I was up to 10,000 a day. By Friday, I want to be up to 50,000 a day. I'm proud to manufacture our products in the United States, and I'm even more proud to be able to serve our nation in this great time of need.
And the reason it's important to hear from these corporate leaders and why we play them to amplify what they had to say last night is because big business is bad, right? Inherently bad. Ooh, corporations bad. Now, corporations may not be people, but they're comprised of people.
Right.
Somebody's producing the MyPillows. Well, now the cloth masks, and somebody's producing the face shields, and somebody's producing all the things that you just heard are being produced.
We're working together. I mean, I watched that last night, and I thought, God bless America, and God bless the businesses that are, stepping up to help those in need, because our soldiers in this fight really are nurses and doctors, first responders, and we have to help them as much as possible.
And it's also a reminder where ingenuity comes from, where the source of America as the greatest, most powerful, most wealthy nation the world has ever seen. It's the private sector that drives that, not the government sector, in an era where everyone is getting increasingly government-centric. So it's a nice reminder about what props up all of this government that you see around you. It's the productive sector. And it's particularly poignant in this time, as I say, with the stories that are coming out the world over about would-be autocrats looking to expand their power over their citizenry in this time of crisis. And it's something we should be on the lookout for, too. It's not going to be like it is in Hungary and America, at least not with the speed. But there are things happening at the state and local level, and to some extent the federal level. I don't even like the arm twisting of GM by President Trump, that are concerning, that should be paused for thoughtful consideration. For more on what America will look like in the post COVID-19 world, particularly these companies and small businesses, too, that are struggling to stay afloat right now, we're pleased to be joined by Frank Diana. He's a global consultant with Tata Consultancy Services, working with leading companies on how to prepare for the future with a focus on enabling the enterprise of 2020. Frank, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
It's good to have you. And so, as you're talking to companies and they're trying, I mean, especially companies with fewer than 500 employees, but even big companies that are shifting what they're doing for the moment, that have significant challenges and are trying to game plan for the next 30, 60, 90 days, and then the next 5 and 10 years. What are you telling them about what the world's going to look like when we come out of this?
Well, I mean, there's two horizons, as you mentioned. Obviously, it's the short-term horizon, and it's all hands on deck as far as dealing with the crisis itself. Obviously, business as usual is anything but. So there's that distraction that most businesses are facing, and then there's the issue of what happens post-pandemic. And it's a complicated story because it's not just the pandemic that was on a path of creating a new world. There was just so much more going on that we all have to take into consideration as we think about the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, and one of those things is going to be what global supply chains look like. I can't imagine that America is going to be willing to continue to accept, for example, 90% of active agents for off-label antibiotics being produced in China.
Yeah, and then that was, as we all know, something that was already in progress. The whole backlash against globalization was something that was a phenomenon before the pandemic. And as is the case with crisis, this will serve as either an accelerant in some places or obstacles to other things. And clearly, it's an accelerant for the globalization or anti-globalization movement that was already in flight. And so for some very good reasons, as you just mentioned, there's a reason to look at supply chain and globalization. But I think the other thing that it tells us, though, is that you can't ignore the fact that the world is very interconnected. I mean, if nothing else, this pandemic shows us exactly that. So I think there's going to be some countervailing winds on the other side of this discussion as well, and it's just a function of how it plays out.
Well, and one of the worst pandemics in recent memory was, the 1918 Spanish flu. And how can you compare that to, the statistics there to what we might be facing here?
Well, that was, if the numbers can be believed, 100 million people dying around the world, one of the worst that we've known. And at least as far as the models are concerned, I don't think they're seeing anything that approaches that kind of damage to society, at least as far as death is concerned. I think this one has a bigger economic impact, at least the way it's shaping up right now, than that one did. And it's interesting as you bring that up. I've been focused on that period in history, the 1920s or right before it, and the pandemic was just one of many things that we really share in common with today's world. It's just fascinating to look back and see the similarities.
Mm-hmm. Although the similarities end with respect to the response post-pandemic, where it was where it was restraining government. Restraining spending, cutting taxes, rather than what perhaps it was certainly is on the table among certain politicians at this point in time with respect to the expansion of government, like we've seen with, say, $6 trillion in disaster relief, and what politicians at the state level in places like New Jersey and Illinois have proposed for this election cycle, which are tax increases.
Yeah, there is a similarity in that. If you remember, World War I was happening at the same time as that pandemic, which some believe helped spread it around the world. And the impact of that was that the nationalism that we see today was also in play in the 20s. And so a desire to focus inward as opposed to continue to focus outward. And again, we're seeing that same thing today, right? So a little different in terms of what was, not different, the same as far as what was happening. The reaction has been different, right, as you just said. But interestingly, back then, the New Deal was an attempt to keep the world from getting to that place again, world wars, for example, and creating some level of infrastructure or structures or institutions that would keep us from getting there again. And so when you do look back in history, there were some reasons for that, whether we agree with them or not, right? And what I look at is, what were those reasons? Are we seeing similar things today? And if so, how might we react this time?
What are the companies that you speak with? What has been their reaction to that $6 trillion worth of stimulus, disaster relief I just mentioned?
Actually, because of this crisis, there's been very little activity as far as my talking to leaders around the world, because they've been focused elsewhere. So I unfortunately can't answer that question.
The thinking about going back to supply chains, then, you said this was something, there was a backlash going on, the trade war between the U.S. and China before this pandemic, and of course there was. And it doesn't mean that America becomes an autarky. It means perhaps, and maybe the pandemic actually facilitates it, when you see the response from a Singapore or South Korea, that you just move those supply chains. They can stay in Southeast Asia. They're just going to be in places like Vietnam and Singapore and South Korea instead of China.
Well, yes, clearly there's a number of things that could happen. That's one scenario. Regional supply chains as opposed to global supply chains is a likely path as well. But in effect, resilience and redundancy at the supply chain level becomes critical, even if it introduces more cost into the equation. I think if we look at the world that we live in, I don't think this is the last we're going to see of crisis. And so it does put a premium on how do you respond and react as these things occur. And so it might shift the equation as far as how we think about this.
And what about the onset of technology? So one of the things that's happening during this time is we're going through a mass experiment in distance learning. The idea and just sort of the vulnerability of human population. How does this impact the trajectory of technology in various sectors? The technology's usage in various sectors of our economy.
Yeah, great question. And if nothing else, we've seen that things like remote work and the education scenario that you just described, maybe certain areas were just unprepared for something like this. And clearly, education has been a key topic around the world. And so I do expect to see this sort of an accelerant. And for example, I can see more emphasis on 5G quicker because obviously the internet has had some of its challenges as more and more people are educating at home or working from home. And so I do completely agree that this will be an accelerant towards a faster path to things like 5G and remote technologies, et cetera.
He is Frank Diana, global consultant with Tata Consultancy Services, working with leading companies on how to prepare for the future with a focus on enabling the enterprise of 2020. Frank, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And Frank joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
If you own a 2016 or older Escalade, Tahoe, Suburban, Chevy pickup, van, or other GM vehicle, there's a good chance you've noticed a vibration when you hit around 40 to 50 miles an hour. It almost feels like you're driving over a rumble strip of road. Maybe you've even visited the dealer and been told there's nothing wrong. The experts at Remke's Garage encourage you to address the problem now before it becomes a much bigger and expensive problem. You've heard Remke's Garage commercials in AM 560 and know they specialize in servicing Sprinters and light-duty diesels. But the experts at Remke's have identified the likely cause of your GM vehicle's vibration problem. Using their state-of-the-art diagnostic tools, Remke's will confirm the problem and explain your repair options. Learn why Remke's Garage is your #1 dealer alternative for repairs to your Chevy, GMC, and Cadillac vehicles. Go to Remke'sGarage.com to schedule your appointment today. That's Remke.